جاكوب لعينا العام والسنة تشرفنا في اللقاء هذا بالتعاون مع مركز الثقافة البريطاني. إن شاء الله تستمتعوا في أمسيته اللي راح يقدم لنا إياها عن أدبه وشعره، وراح نستمتع مع بعض فيها. So welcome to Darat Funun, the Schumann Foundation, and this is our fourth, I think, encounter with Mr. Ross. We started last year with and this year this is the third one, and we are very happy and honored to have him here with us in the Darat Funun, the Schumann Foundation, and I hope that we all will enjoy his writings and poetry. And welcome again to Ahlan wa Sahlan Habibi.
Thank you. And Assalamu alaikum. That's all I know. Okay. He wants to pick me up. Thank you. Okay, I'm very happy to be here, as I keep saying, and this is perhaps I've lost count of the amount of times that I've been meeting with Jordanian people and students, as well as adults like myself, and talking about who I am, where I'm from, and the ideas that affect and influence my writing. I am a very strange person. I belong to a group of writers now coming from the UK. And I think that a lot of people around the world, as we travel, are seeing us for the first time. And I think that most people, including British people, think that people like myself, black people, or people of other racial origins than, of course, the dominant racial group in England, which is, of course, Caucasian, they think that we have just been there. We only arrived in the 1950s, which is not at all true. I happen to be a journalist and a researcher also, and one of the great things that is happening now in England, in the UK in fact, is people rediscovering that Africans, Indians, people from this part of the world really have in fact from a very long time ago been living in England and in the UK and influencing British culture in very important ways. I have many examples of that. For example, Shakespeare, whom we all know, one of his first plays, which was written in the year 1610, was called Titus Andronicus, and it was in fact called the Black Man More, as they called us in those days, who, it was one of those plays which was very dramatic, and it was good for people to laugh and enjoy. Heads were rolling off, hands were falling off, and so on. Later on, he got a bit more serious, and he decided that he was going to write another play. And I think Shakespeare is important, not necessarily in the way they teach us about Shakespeare. We have been told that he had a mistress who was, in fact, not English, she came from our part of the world. But he wrote, of course, Othello, and Othello is about, as you know, a black man having a relationship with a very nice white girl, and of course, they didn't like it too much. And in the end, somebody decided to make life difficult for Othello to the extent where he killed his wife and all of that. Yeah. So since a very long time back, Africans or black people, as well as Indian people, and people from the Middle East, Morocco, and so on, have been living in England. And for example, in 1723, we had one newspaper called the Daily Journal on the 5th of April of that year, I discovered, reported that there were too many black people in the country, a bit like what was happening a couple of years ago. So from the year 1723, at least 300 years ago, people were still complaining about having too many of us there. What I'm saying to you is that we are not new. There are people there are people of Middle Eastern origin, of Eastern origin, and of African origin who have been living in England for the past 400 years. For example, if you go to a city called Liverpool, you will find many people like us there. They've never left the country. They've been there for the past 400 years. So we're not new at all. And it's important to say this because history is very interesting. And you who live in this part of the world, you know how important history is. History is different according to who writes it. So that, for example, if somebody coming from outside of this culture, especially somebody who, is not very kind or nice to you as a people, decides to write your history, they will write it from their point of view. What is important is that you, when you write your history, it comes from you. And what is new and interesting about the UK now is that we are writing our own histories. And of course, we are saying different things. Because never before would you have been told by anybody that from as far back as Shakespeare's time, you were living there, and Shakespeare had a mistress. He was married, but he had another woman who was a black man. That's true, I can prove it. And that I think is very interesting. What's happening in England now, I will tell you a little bit about that with writers. But before I do this, I want to tell you that I am not an individual in the sense that I belong to a group of writers that people tend to describe as one post-colonial and two Caribbean. Okay, although the world reads my work and the world thinks that, it's modern Caribbean. And the Caribbean is a very interesting place. Those of you who know the map of the world, and I discovered that so many Jordanians are so good at geography and history, is that if you look at the map of the Americas, you have the USA, you have Canada, and below that you have the USA, then you have South America. I come from some very small islands, very near South America. They're very tiny islands. As I say to people, the population of my country is 97,000, so you can take all of us and put us somewhere in Amman and be very happy, not happy, but we can be fit very easily into a very small area. And as a child, very often I used to walk across it from one side of the country to the other, and we are actually in the sea. Looking at me, you know for a fact that I am not, you know for a fact that I look African. In fact, my ancestors came from Africa 400 years ago. Okay? Many of us came from that part of the world. How did we get to the Caribbean is important. We got to the Caribbean because 400 years ago, Europe needed labor, they needed forced labor, and as a consequence, they took 25 million Africans and put them on ships against the wind. There were children there, too, there were women, there were men, young men, very strong people, all the strong people, put them on ships and cross the Atlantic with them to these very small islands to work as animals would work if they came free. But what happened, you see, was that a generation after, maybe 25 years or 30, when they counted, there were only 5 million. So what it meant was that 20 million died on the way. Okay? One of the great things about our history. And of course, when we arrived there, we were not allowed to speak the languages that we came with. And there were many nation groups, almost like the Bedouins who speak one language and have, the Circassians speak another language and so on. People from different parts of Africa spoke different languages and had different religions, but they were not allowed to speak the language. If they were caught speaking their language, they were actually executed. And largely because there was a fear on the part of the Europeans that they would organize rebellion. And as a result, we had to create a new language from day one. We had, in order to communicate, we had to create a completely new language. In fact, Caribbean people happen to be the newest, the youngest civilization in the world. Also, what in fact happened was that from many, many parts of the world, people began to come. You had Europeans coming and living there, you had Africans, you had Indians coming later on, and we all began to mix. We didn't have the same kind of problems that some societies have with mixing. So, a white woman, a bit difficult, but let's say a white man from Europe having a relationship with a black woman, having children with her, was not a big issue. So that when you are in the Caribbean now, as I say very often, is that you will see children with very dark skins, darker than mine, or darker than mine, with green eyes or blue eyes, because they carry the blood of the European ancestors in them. We are very mixed. And therefore to say that we are Caribbean is not enough. To be Caribbean means African. No. The majority of people look like me. But a Caribbean person is not just a black person. A Caribbean person is something else. And therefore, when our writers began to write about the Caribbean, they were writing not only about what they were writing about what it means to be Caribbean, what it means to be these people. Also, we came and we were not allowed to remember our history. I was very struck by something yesterday. I was talking to a journalist from one of the papers, and I was trying to explain to him what history is like. And he was saying to me, we were asking many questions about it. You lived in England for the past 17 years, and you've been writing about your country. Do you remember everything? I said, no, I don't. But I tell him that memory and history is not a very simple thing. For example, when he speaks to me about what's happening in the West Bank, okay, he gets angry, he gets upset about what's happening across there. And I said to him, you mentioned what happened yesterday in the West Bank with many Palestinians getting killed, but your anger is much older than that. You are remembering when you are remembering all the years of engagement and so on across there. So that his memory is not just about what happened yesterday. That memory goes much further back. I hope I'm making sense to you. And that is very important for us. We, writers like me, we have to deal with our history because we are the product of our own history. Our history created us, made us what we have become, made us what we are. And again, many of the writers from that part of the world, and they are very important writers for English literature. They are very, very important. In fact, in the 20th century, around the 1950s and so on, not long ago, they were among the most important writers writing in English. One of the greatest poets of the 20th century, and certainly of the 21st also, is a man called Darat. I don't know if you know of Walcott. Walcott won the prize for the Nobel Prize, the highest possible prize you can get for literature, because they were asking very important questions. So what I'm saying to you here is basically that we are about that. One thing which concerns me as a writer that I am very interested in is also what I find people in this country, Jordan, are also interested in, which is to do with territory, property, owning your country, owning your space, owning your place. And I know what it means for you, what the word homeland means. And much of my writing is about that. My writing is also about women in my society. I say this very often because it's so important. You know, the men in my part of the world, they feel that it's a birthright. As soon as they get to be around 18 years old or 21, in fact even younger, they have a right to leave the country and go abroad. So they go to America, they go to Canada, they go to England, like me, and they live there. All of the very bright people leave and they go abroad. And they become brilliant nuclear physicists. But the thing is, we don't make nuclear bombs on these small islands. So when they return, they can't be employed. Okay? They're useful only for people from my country, highly qualified as, you know, they have PhDs in very strange things in chemistry. But back in my country, we don't need them. We need people who can tell us how to farm better, who can tell us how to build perhaps a factory for processing fruits. But of course, they're not interested in that. We don't have an air force, but they become fighter pilots. Yes? And what I'm saying to you is that the way we have been educated is part of the problem. But they go abroad. They leave the country. And what do? They stay. And very often they leave the women, the children, and the older people behind. So that, in fact, there have been times, many times, when the great projects of the big industrial countries like the USA, like England, like Canada, are being built. For example, the Panama Canal, which is like joining two seas together, cutting across this piece of land and making two seas meet. People from my part of the world were the ones who built the Panama Canal. When after the Second World War, when Europe was destroyed, when Hitler had bombed England and destroyed the country literally. You had many people from my country leaving home and going to rebuild England. So there were, and you still people in England now, you see many black people like me from the Caribbean working on the trains. Okay? They built back the railroads, they built back the buildings, okay? But of course, they left there. And back home, where they have come from, it's almost as if there has been a war, because when you get there, you don't see the young men. You know, it's like they were gone to war, which is what happens in a war situation where the men go off to fight, and they leave the women there, and the children. To the extent where the most important people in our society are not the men, it is the women, because they are the ones who stay and they hold things together. They are the ones who bring the children out. They are the ones who educate them. And I write about that. What it means to be a woman, for example, living in our society. These are things which occupy me a great deal as a writer. I have to say this to you, that for many of us writers, writing is not just, it's not a game, it's not something we do for money. Sometimes money comes and we're very happy, so writers are very poor usually. But it is a responsibility, okay? And I have many arguments now with press, including sometimes the BBC, when they ask me questions of, are you a committed writer, which means, you know, you have strong views about the world and society. Do I write just beautiful things for the sake of doing it? And I said, no, I'm not somebody who writes beautiful things for the sake of it. I am a committed writer. I'm interested in what this African writer called Chinua Achebe said, which is to do with re-education, rebuilding, giving a sense of dignity to your people, and in fact, in a larger extent, to people of the world. That's what I'm into, you know, and of course they can choose to read my work or not, but I don't apologize for that. I was listening to a program on radio yesterday, the Jordanian radio, the English channel, and there was a woman who was saying exactly the same thing. We just don't have, where we come from, the luxury of writing for fun, or writing only for money. We write because there are important things to say. Jordan is interesting. It's a country which fascinates me, and I've traveled a lot, as you know. I've been to most of the places in the world, but this is one of the few places that I find extremely interesting. And that is because it's one of the societies in the world where you have stories to tell. This country needs its writers and its artists. It really does. And I think it seems to me that there has to be an effort to develop the young, really talented people. I have been doing workshops with young people in some of the schools, very bright. And I give them stories to write, or give them stories to invent. And it's all American stories. A man walking down New York with a gun swinging. You know, it's all American, what they see on television. And I'm very polite, because that's my first workshop with them. And I want them to feel very comfortable. And they do it very well. But if I have to continue working with them, I would say, what about you? You know, because the way Americans love is not the way Jordanians love. If a Jordanian boy wants to get married to a Jordanian girl, and he's Christian and she's Muslim, then it's a different thing altogether. Okay? It's a different kind of story. And what I'm saying to you is that it's not just about relationship, it's about many other things. And that's why I believe that your writers, the ones whom you have, you should just honor them, because they are so important. When I first went to my country after leaving it, I left in 84, and I returned 2 years later. I literally could not enter the country and appear in a public space because I was felt so threatened by the things I wrote, even though they were about children. I returned there last year in December, and there were television cameras waiting for me to welcome me. And I said, has something gone wrong? Has the world changed? I got very worried, in fact. I said, am I writing something that is not really good now, you know? Because I expected to be slightly upset with me still. But I think what it did for them is people began to realize, and many of the young women especially, would come and just say, thank you, you know, not sugar, but thanks, you know, and run on. Because for them, you know, their stories are beginning to be heard around the world. It's extremely important that you do that. One last thing I want to say, there are many things I can say, and I prepare speeches, right? And then 10 pages. Anyway, one of the things I want to say is for us, language is very important. Which language shall I write in? I know, again, people here have very strong feelings about that. You should write in English when your language is Arabic. I have views about that too, I can tell you. I have many views about that. I used to write a lot in English before, but I have begun to do what many writers in my part of the world now, which is that I write in a language that my mother speaks in, that my grandmother speaks in, that most of the people in my country speak in. I also write in English, and sometimes I combine them, okay, because it's a very interesting language. But I will not. Your language contains your history and your culture, and there are some things which your language contains that no other language, doesn't matter how good you are, can contain. There are many, many examples of that. If you wanted to know more, you ask me questions. Okay? So I write in that kind of language. I will stop here and ask you to ask me questions. So please feel free. Don't feel shy and don't think what you're going to think of the questions, right? I'll answer them. Talk to me. I'll pause here. Then maybe I'll read you something. I'll read you something. Those of you who came before, you have heard it before. Cheers. There is a silence. I can sit like this for the rest of my life. I don't know about you.
Yes. Well, Mr. Jacob, you said that you often and most of your writing will focus about your own culture, about your environment, your own country, and the greenness. So, what was the reason for this fame you have now as a writer? Is it because you wrote in English, or do you think if you wrote in your own language, would you have the same fame that you have now?
It's a very important question. I have it's a colleague, not really a friend. His name is Yongo. He is one of the most famous African writers. A few years ago, he wrote a book, and he said, this is the last book I am going to write in English. I'm going to write in Kikuyu, the language of people in Kenya. In other words, and he was saying basically, look, I've got to a point where all my life I have been taught to read all kinds of novels, all kinds of other people's language, okay? And they've translated novels from French, from Spanish to my language. Why can't they translate my language to their language if they want to read it? But you see, he was already very famous because he wrote in English, his first novels. The point that he was trying to make is very important. But I believe this. If you look at all of the really important, the ones they call great writers in the world, you will notice one very important thing, is that they always write from within what I call the cultural space. Aditale is one of the famous Ghanaian writers, he lives in England. Okay? He writes about Jordan, about what you like in Jordan, you know, and you should read him. One of the greatest writers that I know and whom I really love is Toni Morrison. She's an African American. Toni Morrison is not interested in writing in any other kind of space apart from her space as a black person living in the USA. She has been, you know, I mentioned a while ago Derek Walcott. What I'm saying to you is that we don't need, and I would love to tell the young people, I actually did a workshop with that, you don't need to write about anybody else's culture to be universal. Because as human beings, we all have what you call similar profiles. You know what anger is, you know what love is, you know what it is to need and to want and to struggle for things, right? So if you write about that, anybody else anywhere else can connect with that, and that's what it's about. It's not about writing in anybody's language or anybody's culture. I happen to write in English for many reasons, because I have been educated like that, I think, and my first understanding of literature was in fact English literature. Later on, I was able to look at that and change it. But it's a good question. I hope I answered the question. Anything else? She's scratching your eyebrow. What's that question you're trying to pull out? I think you should feel free to ask me questions. Yes. Okay, but he's doing it very good. Fine, you're welcome. They don't want to ask you, ask for them.
Because I
Sorry? Okay, fine.
Well, actually, because I missed the first session.
Okay.
That's cool. Well, when you write about that, when you read, have you ever read for writers?
For other writers?
Yes, whom you find, attracted to your attention or something?
Have I read for them or read?
No, read their works.
Yes.
Their works, like example, or something.
Yes.
Famous writers.
Yes.
Of course, they wrote, I think, some Egyptian writers, they wrote, and they talk about their own culture, their culture, and especially
Yes.
particular the Egyptian one.
Yes.
So I think they have the same style as you have.
Yes.
They talk about their own culture.
Yeah.
So did you write? Have you ever been with them or something?
Have I ever met them? I've met many of them. I mean, I'm only just beginning to meet writers from all over the world because I tend to be, I met some Koreans who were very interesting recently, and some really good poets, especially in that part of the world. But as I said to you a while ago, yes, writers tend to write from their own cultural space, even if they live abroad. I mean, I am writing now other kinds of books, and there is a book which I'm doing at the moment, and it's based in England. It's very London-based, it's a book of stories I'm doing, because I feel like it, but it's not my priority, and never has been. And I don't see why nobody can force me to do it. And I have a good friend who is, her first book, I won't quote her name, her first book was brilliant. It's a very good book. The second, it was about just living, what it's like as a woman living in London and all that. The second book, she decided to write a book based in America. Beautiful book, but nobody read it. In fact, I read an article back in the American press that said, why would an English woman want to tell me what America is like when she lives there and I live here? And that's really what it's about. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I can see that, but is there not a difference between writing from your culture and writing about your culture? Because I can think of writers who write about other cultures, like Vikram said.
Yes.
Who then, he writes about America and about India and about lots of different things.
Yes.
But he's always writing from his culture, but he's describing America, if you like, from his...
Absolutely, as he sees it. But I mean, and that's why I say from the cultural space, Meaning, of course, I mean, for example, I told you that I'm a very strange animal now. In England, very often, and I keep saying this, when I'm speaking, English people will say to me, very politely, where are you from? And I would say very politely, oh, well, I'm from the Caribbean originally, I just live here. I have a daughter, she's born here, and she's very English, And then when I go home to my country, if they don't know me, they would say, well, which part of England are you from? Because they pick up my way of speaking. So that in fact, what happens is I'm almost like a hybrid now. I mean, I have one leg in England and one in the Caribbean. I've become a very strange person after living most of my adult life in Europe. I was in France for many years. I went back to my country, worked there, returned to England and live in England now for the past 17 years. So I'm a very strange kind of person. And back home, I'm a foreigner. And in England, I'm a foreigner too. And what I'm saying to you is that but it doesn't prevent me from writing about England as, that kind of which Vikram said claims to be, and all of the most of the writers in England now, like Salman Rushdie, Vikram said, and so on. They talk about the world in that way, is that they're hybrids. They kind of belong to all that, many different spaces.
No, I think all the things that have been raised may lead us to ask the question whether the writer should have first-hand experience about what he or she writes, and also whether whether it is enough for the writer to grasp, comprehend, understand what it means to be in a certain situation. For example, to write about one woman. It is enough, I think, for a writer to know exactly what it means to be a woman, or what it means to be in love, what it means to lose one's only child, to write about, of course, these things.
It's a good question, because once I got challenged by a very good friend of mine who is in America now and is writing. She read one of my stories, in my first book, and she said to me, she described me as a man who is locating himself inside of a woman, and in fact she felt that that's not for a man to do. So I said to her, but the last time I checked, I was my mother's child, and I still am, and in many ways I grew up with my mother, I grew up with women, and somebody has to start this thing off. Now we have many women writing, and I think that a man would find it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to write a woman's experience, because women live this experience in a way that men don't. But it doesn't prevent a man from writing, about his reality in a world of women, which is what I write about. Yeah, I don't know if I'm making sense. But I think that women's stories, as is happening right now, all over the world, women's stories are becoming more dominant, more important than men's stories. Because women have been so silent for so long, so that what women have to say. In fact, all of the very important young writers that I know in the UK are women. Coming from, again, being the same cultural space as me, or the same background as me. I can call their names. There's Bernadette Evaristo. There is Lady Smith, who became very rich with her first novel. It's called White Tea. What I'm saying to you is that women's stories are, in fact, the important stories now, for the simple reason that women have been very silent for very long. And they have stories to tell, and I can't do it, men can't do it.
Yeah. Well, it does seem to me that there are a lot of stories being written now by men in their 30s, which is maybe where you are.
Thank you, you're very kind.
Trying to figure out how to lead their lives. So that's another important stream that's happening at the moment.
It's a good point. Right now, you have in Europe especially, and America, men in their 30s writing about what life is. You know why? Because right now, men are going through some enormous psychic shifts in that part of the world, because men's role are being completely blown apart. There was a time when the man was the breadwinner. The man went out to work and he brought home. Okay, the man had the biggest salary, usually, the bigger salary. Now, women, you have more women bosses. You have more women actually in taking over some of the roles that the men used to play. And there is a big statement now, and I don't know how true it is, but that men are in crisis. Because what it means to be a man is no longer true for men, because women are taking these over in very serious ways. Yeah? So that men are right now going through an enormous kind of thing about that. And maybe it will happen here, I don't know. But if it happens, of course, it is going to be very important. And men are actually trying to understand what's happening with them.
This is a good point. It's certainly happening in the West.
Yes.
It's not happening in Jordan, I guess.
No.
But equally, I guess it may happen in Jordan.
Eventually, I
I'm
can see.
interested in
Very nice conversation about that. Do you think men's role will change eventually that you have women? I don't know. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a bit for you. I'm going to read some thought pieces. They're not really poems, but they're thought pieces. Then I would do a couple of love poems, and I do them to prove to people that I don't always write about very serious things. I also write about love. It's very nice to write about love. I also write a whole range of things. So I will do a couple of them for you. And maybe if you want, I can read from my book, which has been doing very well for me. It goes on. Okay. This one is called Fortune, and I know that Arabic people love love poems because they have a great, strong tradition in that. So I'll read one for you, and then another one, and then another one, and perhaps we'll do something else. It's called Fortune. In the rain we met and slept on the wetness of leaves aged and decayed as my faith in love. I could have told you so many things. Instead, I chose to trace with cold fingers the contours of your face and watch my love decline in the darkness of your eyes. I love you, said my lips. Hoping these words of nakedness would give meaning to the grateful words. And then you stirred, your hair so wet, so soft like mud. Love, my friend, you said to me, is only a memory of pain, felt deep in flesh and blood. Then you slept, while I wept on the wet earth till I could not tell who cried, the sky or I. You see, they come alive now. This is amazing. Okay. I've got another love poem. Sometimes poetry is not about rhyme. Poetry is about many other things apart from rhyme. And I'm tempted to kind of write things down to show you what I mean, but of course, this is not the kind of session to do that. It's about feelings. It's about trying to find a kind of very accurate way of saying things. And this is for somebody who I used to think a lot about, so it really did happen, but you can't ask me for a lot. And it's a very simple statement. It's called, oh, I don't have the name here. I cannot always tell which part of you I carry in me. Sometimes it's your voice or what lies behind your breathing. If tonight I dream your name, it is because I say it every day. Every day I call your name and call again until my mouth is full of you. Sometimes I cannot always say which part of you resides in me. She really liked that one. And this is a poem I wrote according to the structure of the way we tell stories and the way we tell poetry in my part of the Caribbean, which is that when you say poetry, you don't look for rhymes and all of that. You look for rhythm sometimes, but you get one beautiful image, one beautiful picture, and that makes poetry. Am I making sense? Okay, let me see if you can get, if you agree with me that there is a picture here or an image. I was in Jamaica, passing through Jamaica once, and I was in the hotel, and I heard this man who was obviously very hungry, and he was saying, "We want food, we want to eat." That's Jamaican way of saying, "I'm hungry, I want to eat." And I couldn't sleep. I was there in the hotel all night, and I kind of said, "Shut your bloody mouth!" But of course, he didn't hear me or hear the goods. He was hungry. And I sat down. It made me sad. I sat down and I wrote this little piece. Poor man, poor old man, baying in the lonely cold of night like mad dog in heat of hunger. Poor man, old man, for eyes of whom the moon moves like a silver spoon, scooping up the rice of stars. If only you had the strength to sleep and a simple bowl of rice to eat. Did you get the image? Which one was it? The one with the moon, yes. The moon, I'm very close actually. The moon moves like a silver spoon, scooping up the rice of stars. I mean, you can't go to do that. Come on, lads. Right. Thank you. I like doing poetry because it's short and because it's easy to say. Some of my poetry is very try to reflect some kind of violence that I used to experience when I was young. We had where I'm from in Grenada when I was a child. I saw quite a few terrible things. We had a political system which was very oppressive, and as a child I knew that when 6 o'clock arrived, I had to be told, because if the soldiers caught me on the road, I would get shot. And in 1974, I was walking, we had a demonstration, we call it here. Yes, and what happened is that the soldiers came, the police, and they shot many people, including children. And I tried to capture this by using a kind of rhythm which is very Caribbean, because they'll be like, and it's a bit like rap. So long before this rap thing happened in America, I was doing rap. Yeah. I did it slowly, yeah. It's 1970. And it happened again in 1983, similar kind of thing. So it goes like this. 1974, gun, smoke, white, rib sky, chair left, rock right, break, center, make Grenada quake and shake like a child with ague. 1974, the hair creep deep, kill sleep, and all hearts cease to beat while we reap seeds of hate and agony. And my grandmother shook her head in the wind. She said, something is happening. And soon the time will come when no moon, no rain, no sun, no gun will stop the stomp of the people's feet or clamp down when it's advance. Fire bitter, angry river flood of words, pouring from within his heart. And we live 5 years before we seek the truth of what she said to be. 1983, gun, smoke, wild, red sky, tail left, rock right, break, center. Okay. And I'll do just one last one before I stop. That's the most recent one I've ever done. It's a city poem, and people ask me about writing about where I live, but I do sometimes. Although it's connected with something that happened in America. I have a friend who's a writer. She used to do lots of work with the British country also. Her name is Amber Johnson. And early last year, Amber went to visit a friend, came back home, and sat down and never got up. She died sitting in her chair in her house in Coventry, England. Amber was there for 1 month, dead, and nobody actually realized that she wasn't around. And what happened was that eventually, of course, they didn't see her. She didn't turn up for a wedding or readings like I'm doing now. So the police came and broke her door down and found her there. And that shocked me. It really shook me up. And I asked myself, how is it that in a city where people live so closely together, where you have neighbors just behind a wall, somebody can die. Somebody can be so lonely in a place where there are so many people. And you see many people like that in the big cities of the world, people who, they're surrounded by people, yet they're so lonely. It cannot happen, I believe, in Jordan. It certainly can't happen in Africa and in my country. If you're dead within a day, everybody knows. Because people are always looking into your business. It's not always nice. It's not always nice, but it's true. And I did a poem which I have to read very carefully because I think some of it might be a bit, whatever. It's about an image I use of people who are hunters, and I'm a hunter in the sense that, I go out there and I really get what I wanted to get because I work for it. And there are other people who want to sit and beg. They are the hunted. They are victims in many ways. Some of them can't really help it. So there's the hunter and the hunted. No, the hunter and the hunted. And the hunters like us, we all hunters by the way, right? The hunters like us, we are in fact scared and uncomfortable by those people there sometimes. I know when I pass through this big station called London Bridge, and I see people there begging. I feel very uncomfortable about it sometimes, yeah? So it's a bit like that. And it's for Amril, and I read it very carefully, hopefully. In these streets, the hunters haunt the hunted. Proud of float, shadows float beneath the falling flakes of light. Crawl between the burning blooms of neon, which in fireworks of silence cry, come on man, buy. For a discount we make you count. Among the countless dispossessed, those unaccounted for, who sell their souls for want of more, who cry the blues and live on booze for want of food. In these bitter streets of bitumen, cold steel and glass, concrete sprout like trees, assaulting skies or smoking lead. Who cares? Hair, where self is chained to self by fear of friend, and friend is tied to friend by fear of self. In these streets, the hunted book, and I shouldn't be saying this, is for sale, but I should be. I don't know how much it costs, I think it's 80 or whatever it is, but I promise you that you will find something in here that interest you. Okay, so if you really want, you can get a copy. Any more questions? No, you're a little part-time bother. At the British Council, yes. And there are some here at first. And I'll sign them for you. If you want.
There's some books here.
Yes, I've just said there are some books here. Okay. Sure. Thank you for that.
And I would like to thank the British Council for bringing us from far Caribbean, this great talent for here to Jordan. And I think we all enjoyed this evening and all the evenings that we shared with us. Thank you.
Thank you.